website, but also Celia is taking the day, and each of the presentations will have their own file, which will be uploaded onto the website and be there permanently. If you do want to revisit any of the books. We are under the umbrella of Learn today. Learning Environments Applied Research Network was set up collaboratively between Melbourne Graduate School of Education and the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning a few years ago. Medicine has now come on board as one of the co-organisers of that, or co-hosts of that within this university, but it is a network. So we have industry partners right around Australia and internationally who also contribute to Learn equally. They set the agenda for what research are we doing, what direction are we going. Within that, I'm proud to say that that Learn group has, for many years, always had an ARC linked project running, the fourth in a row, and that's commendable for any group, particularly a small type group on a very particular, very specific topic like learning environments. It speaks highly to the collaborative nature of this actual enterprise. E21LE is the hosting group, which is the current ARC project, which, as you know, is titled Evaluating 21st Century Learning Environments, and from that, you get a sense of the focus of today. Perhaps I'll just give you a quick frame of reference for the day. We are looking here at the young minds, the young emerging minds, all those thoughts, etc. coming. We intentionally did not set up a symposium that was finished research in terms of established academics. We've got lots of really good academics. We don't need to actually keep on hearing from them. At the moment, coming through. The reason why is they do give us snapshots. They give us snapshots of what are actually the things that really at the front of our and side of them in terms of learning environments. So along that line, we are keeping snapshots in that everyone will present very briefly, just 10 minutes, and they'll be cut off nice and quick. In fact, after 7 minutes, they'll have the dreaded 7 flashed on the table over there. At 9 minutes, there'll be an audio cue, and at 10 minutes, the bouncers will come and remove the person from the podium. If we don't keep the 10 minutes going regularly right throughout the day, then we're going to end up at the end of the day either running over or begging this out. So I hope you understand. If it looks rude, we're shutting people off. I don't think we will, but that's just the way that I'm afraid we're just going to have to do it. We have some overseas presenters. We start off the day with a Skype from New Zealand, and we'll finish the day with a Skype from Ireland. Other than that, we have other interstate and overseas visitors with us today representing as well, which is excellent. Beside the door on the way in, there are some mock-ups. The mock-ups are of the front cover and an internal page of a book. The presentations today are going to be considered by the panel, and some of them will be invited to then resubmit their presentation as a more padded out book chapter. And we will publish the book, which is titled, the running title at the moment is What Works? Emerging Research into Learning Environment Evaluation. And that will be come live at least by the end of the year. We're hoping before that date. So keep an eye open for that. It will be publicised through our website. And because we have your mailing list, we'll send you a notice when that book is actually ready to come out. As far as the actual day goes, we're going to have 10-minute sessions, and we're going to run 2 or maybe 3 in a row, and then we're going to stop for a discussion. And then we'll either have a break, or in two of the sessions, just to get through 5 papers, we'll run then straight into the next 2 papers and another discussion. The idea is to try and let you as the audience engage in the ideas that are coming across, but we'll ask you to actually keep your questions, jot down notes, and ask them during the discussion time. We'll actually have a guest interlocuteur who will be an established researcher in the field. We invited to come along and actually listen through the presentations. At the end of the presentations during the discussion time, we're hoping they might be able to summarise, using their own expert knowledge, some of the key things that are coming through, some of the areas of research that's really interesting and going in a particular direction, but then also start bringing your comments, asking questions, and we'll have that 20 or 30 minutes of discussion time to be able to go back and interrogate the ideas that these people are putting forward. Interlocuteur is an interesting expression. In the dictionary it's defined 2 ways. One is a facilitator of discussion. The other thing is actually a juggler in a medieval court. And I think in some ways the interlocuteurs today are going to be doing that. They're going to try to be juggling these new ideas and your conversations, because while we're taking this, we're actually conducting research to some degree, and that is the book is going to need to use the things that you're talking about here to go back into the chapters to build the chapters up into something more substantial. So thank you for your contribution before we start. A short one interlocuteur at the moment, so I might perhaps invite Claire, would you like to do the first session? Ken will be here soon, and perhaps he can do the one after the break. If you would like to step in first, that'd be great. You've even got a guest seat, so your spot will be here for now. We are welcoming now from New Zealand Mark Osborne, who's not quite there yet. So we might move, to keep timing going properly, we'll move to Chris Bradbury. Chris, you've got to step up and start firing things up. I first met Chris Bradbury here in Melbourne, but after that I quickly went over to Stonefield School in New Zealand to view what is quite a remarkable institution. Stonefield's primary school is one of those schools that was set up intentionally to tackle the notion of how to space into related pedagogy. And the work that Chris is doing, he began with us here in the Learn Group, being supervised for a Master of Philosophy, and has swapped the Master of Philosophy, such as the extent and the quality of the work that he is doing. He's now extended that actually into a PhD. Chris's work is quite remarkable because he's tackling one of those areas that's of particular concern to educators at that moment, and that is it's fine to build nice spaces, but how do we get teachers to actually use them well? And the particular focus that you'll hear from Chris is around the concept of collaboration, building collaborative practices amongst teachers that make the most of the spaces that architects have given them. One last word before Chris starts. Today has got three themes to it. First theme is emerging issues. Second theme is emerging methods, and the third is emerging knowledge. And you'll find as we go through the papers that each person is talking to some degree each of those three themes. Chris is at the forefront of the emerging issues topic, in particular with that notion of how the teachers actually engage in using space and working with each other in improving education quality. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Liz. Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, and it's great to be here. As I said, my name is Chris Bradbury. Our place, Stonefield School, built in a primary school, opened in 2011 in Auckland, where I have the privilege of being one of the associate principals. This is an emerging research project, very much so, and I'm also pleased to know I'm still being called young. And over the next 10 minutes, I hope to just sort of frame where my thinking is at the moment that's really come out of the practice that's happened here over the last 3.5 years and outline some of the key issues. To put it into context, if we're thinking about learning environments in New Zealand, it's a really dynamic at the moment. The earthquakes, Christchurch in September 2010, 2011, have given rise to a building program unparalleled in the country's history. As a result, many schools are in need of complete rebuilding, many are being constructed on brand new greenfield sites, and some completely demolished and rebuilt, together with another sort of 92 or 100 moderately affected schools that need to be redeveloped. So on a New Zealand budget, we're talking sort of $1.5 billion. Coupled with this is an ongoing repair of leaky buildings within schools, partly caused by the materials and the code changes and all sorts of things going on around the country. There's another $1.5 billion being spent on leaky buildings across the school. The Herald and the news headlines are constantly full of stories of leaky buildings in schools. So this is very much a timely kind of discussion to have. And coupled with that, in Auckland, very quickly expanding city, our own school is very much part of the Auckland Unitary Plan, and we're filling in new housing developments. So it's seen very much as an opportunity. In very much the same way as the BER project did in Australia, the need for so many schools to undergo this complete and extensive refurbishment and rebuilding has given us opportunities to start thinking differently, sort of pedagogically and architecturally. So many schools are now designing modern learning environments. We use MLE as modern learning environment in New Zealand as opposed to innovative learning environment over here. Really to design to meet the needs of today's learners. You know, very much centered around student-centered pedagogies. You know, they offer a variety of learning settings, high degrees of design, sophistication, purposefulness, flexibility. But what's interesting is the way that that's actually challenging teacher practice. As a researcher, my own narrative contributes strongly to this research. The opportunity to be involved in a new school and to start thinking what might be possible would I wouldn't have got here if it wasn't for that. We're very much sort of seen as early adopters in the MLE spaces. So I want you to get a little bit of a feel for this place this morning. We constantly take visitors around our school, and there's some really interesting questions that come out of that. Our learning environments are built predominantly sort of 75, 95 students, ranging across year levels with multiple teachers in each one. Teachers share a space together. They teach together, they work alongside each other, and they constantly interact with each other. Children are involved in a variety of tasks, building knowledge, making meaning, applying understanding, possibly in reciprocal teaching arrangements, working in small groups, working with teachers or with a peer, design and building artifacts, engaged in learning alongside experts and parents and other people that come in from school. Many of the kids are online too as well. We have to realise that our kids are sort of very much in the physical environment, but equally they're spending as much time in an online environment as well. They may be taking photos, uploading images, creating wikis, creating sites, docs, sharing things on a constant process. What visitors to the school notice is they see the space to start with, and they come away and then they say, well, there's lots of how questions. How do the teachers work so closely together? How do the teachers know who's doing what? How do the children know who's doing what? How do the children know who their teacher is? What happens when it all goes wrong? These are the questions that ultimately have driven sort of my desire to actually sort of start doing some research around it. Why is it actually important? Well, it's important for professional learning. It's important for schools to start considering what this collaborative practice actually means 9 o'clock on a Monday morning in terms of practice, and therefore thinking about, well, what are the core values and beliefs behind that? What's the why? What are the hows in terms of the principles that underpin it? And then what are the practices that actually mean it actually happens? For teachers, working together and working collaboratively is nothing new. It's a highly significant and well documented form of teacher practice and form of professional learning. But most collaboration in schools happens somewhere else before teachers then go back to their own place to do their core business of teaching. It happens somewhere else. When looking at modern learning and environment literature, you notice frequent references to collaboration, frequent references to team teaching. But it's not always that easy. A lot of these spaces that were being designed now, and at times seem to be quite architecturally driven, are designed purposely for collaborative practice. We know if we look in things like the OECD report on innovative learning environments, it's talking very much about challenging the sort of pedagogical core of what learning environments look like and to make the most of opportunities for teachers to work together. Why? Well, it's around communities of practice and it's around professional learning communities. There's a sense that with teachers working together, they're going to benefit from collaborative planning. There's going to be shared opportunities for professional learning and ongoing professional learning. There'll be opportunities for students to work with a variety of teachers and therefore have a sort of real sense of pedagogical variation in the way that learning is, teaching is taught and learning is learned. The idea that you can probably better meet the needs of a greater range of teachers, a greater range of students than you can when you just got one teacher. And add to this the benefits for new teachers and mentoring new teachers in much more visible learning environments. So having an understanding of what this collaboration actually looks like is going to be really, really critical for professional learning for schools that are moving into this, and also ongoing professional learning for schools that are actually in this process already. Because the big assumption that's being made at the moment, when we look at a lot of the architectural stuff and listening to the rhetoric behind the collaboration and team teaching, is that teachers are going to know what to do. That's the big assumption, that they're going to know what to do. But team teaching, if we look at it, it doesn't always look like that. I mean, team teaching as a model's been around since the 1950s. Look like this. I love the little diagrams of the desks and chairs, and it's very much a teacher-centered version of team teaching. The guidebooks, the myriad of guidebooks to team teaching, generally based in America, are very much based on special education. After team teaching came alongside open plan education for a long time, but then as it lost favour, it was actually the special education literature that started then taking on this notion of team teaching. When you look through the literature in terms of architecturally in those same guides, you'll get no architectural reference at all. There's no spatial reference at all in that material. It says it just happens in a classroom. So there's no spatial link between what team teaching looks like in that context and what it might look like in a modern learning environment. So that's another reason we think, look, this is a real potential gap in the literature and a real potential for what we're doing. I'm running out of time. So what I'm hoping to do is to go through and look at a number of different skills environments. I'm really keen on understanding what it is, going back to Julia Atkins' model, very much what it is in terms of the principles that underpin collaboration in modern learning environments. Because those are going to be applicable, hopefully, across a wide range of contexts. There is going to be massive variety across different schools. Our schools are highly complex spaces. And we know that the collaborative practice adds another layer of complexity to something that is already quite complicated. So the study that I'm sort of proposing, the study that I'm proposing is looking at interviewing a range of experts in collaboration and in modern learning environments in the New Zealand context, embracing that. Then getting into some snapshot studies of probably about half a dozen schools that will look at actually pulling out what are some of those essences, some of those principles that actually underpin what it is that we're actually doing, and then to go in deep with a smaller number of schools in terms of some in-depth case studies to look at what the actual practices are and what those teachers are actually doing. Ultimately, it's a big assemblage of lots of things, lots of different pieces, socio-spatial pieces that actually sort of fit together. There isn't going to be a right answer, but I do think it's going to be able to pull out a range of those key practices and key principles that underpin what it is we're doing. I'm not sure leave it there.
Thank you, Chris. And I've just got to say you had 4 seconds to spare, so you came in on time. This is very much snapshots. This is getting a taster of these ideas. And don't forget that we do have a discussion time coming up. And if you're really smart, you might say to Chris when question time gets opened up by our doctor that, oh, gee, that slide, do you mind putting that back up again? And we'll just have a quick look at that again. So you can actually revisit the talk a little bit during that discussion time, under the direction of the interlocuteur. Do we have Mark Osborne?
Yeah. Did somebody else think of that topic?
No. We don't have that? Yep, we do. So our second speaker today is Mark Osborne, also from New Zealand. Mark is at the very beginning stage of a PhD with our group here in Bern. Mark is in an enviable position where he works in a consulting firm directly with educators in Christchurch at working on the redevelopment of brand new schools. So Christchurch Suddenly is getting a swathe of brand new schools being built, which clearly should be a cutting edge stand in terms of architectural design and the importance that produces then for pedagogies in the classroom. So as an educator, from an education background, Mark comes into this hothouse, I suppose, which is Christchurch in terms of learning environment development, and his particular focus is on trying to affect leadership and getting that leadership in turn to be able to make the sorts of things Chris talked about a minute ago actually happen. So, Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
And I'll hand over to you, and the clock's running, and I'll shout out 7 minutes and 9 minutes.
Righto.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Chris. So during 2011, Christchurch in New Zealand suffered a series of catastrophic earthquakes that left thousands of city buildings damaged and hundreds of people dead. Many public buildings across the city, including schools, were damaged beyond repair, and the program to rebuild them has resulted in one of the largest school network renewal projects the world has ever seen. The New Zealand government has invested more than 1.1 billion New Zealand dollars to rebuild and renew 115 schools. An explicit goal of the New Zealand Ministry of Education through this process is to make what they call modern learning environments common throughout Greater Christchurch. And one of the most significant challenges in this extremely ambitious program of work is the transitioning of the teaching workforce from primarily industrial era classroom spaces into open, flexible, collaborative teaching and learning spaces. However, the renewal program affords us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to study a range of different approaches to implementing transformative change within the context of the physical learning environment. My role, as Wes has said, as a consultant for a not-for-profit organisation that works alongside schools to help develop and articulate their vision for learning, and to build not only the buildings but also the human capabilities, dispositions and support structures required to ensure this vision is achieved. And this puts me in a unique position to draw from the experiences of a wide range of schools as they redevelop their built environments and their ways of operating. Three potential areas of research I'd like to explore centre around leading this transformative change, the role of sense-giving and sense-making in implementing change, and implementing change in cases of low cultural fit. So the first one, successfully leading transformative change. For many teachers, students, parents, and school leaders, the move to open, flexible, collaborative learning environments represents a significant departure from business as usual. Rather than being an incremental adjustment to notions of education, this is a total transformation that challenges almost every aspect of the system, from identity and the roles that individuals play, through to the metrics that we use to measure success. Many researchers, including Heifetz and Laurie, Waters, Mazzano and McNulty, refer to two different kinds of change as people commonly experience them. Technical change is viewed as change that is an extension of the past, and that which sits within existing paradigms, is consistent with prevailing norms and values, and can be implemented with existing knowledge and skills. Adaptive change, however, represents a break from the past. It sits outside existing paradigms, conflicts with prevailing norms and values, and requires new knowledge and skills to implement. For most teachers, the move to modern learning environments represents the second adaptive change. And given that different support structures are required depending on whether the change is technical or adaptive, and that the same change can be experienced by different people within an organisation as being both technical and adaptive, what kinds of support structures lead to successful implementation of transformative or adaptive change? Change often leads to people feeling personally threatened because the skills and strengths for which they're being valued and respected in the old order may not be as important or valued in the new order. This acknowledgement is crucial for leading change because we know that if people are feeling threatened or unsafe, they are less likely to fully engage the rational, logical part of their brain. So while the change might sound perfectly well reasoned, rational and common sense, this doesn't guarantee that people will fully engage with it. So how do leaders provide support in both the affective and the cognitive domains? Connor, 1998, suggests that a menu of change leadership styles is required to manage what he calls torrential change. He lists 6 different styles of leadership when approaching change and argues that the leadership styles of anti-change, rational, panacea and bolt-on might work well with first-order change, but because they rely on extrapolating from past experience, they are insufficient when leading adaptive change, which, by definition, disrupts the existing paradigm, rendering many lessons learned from past experience irrelevant. Connor suggests that continuous and integrated leadership are the only styles that can cope with adaptive change. So how do leaders create cultures of knowledge creation within schools, seeking to use these as generative problem-solving contexts, rather than acting to simply provide technical support when problems are encountered? It's another research opportunity in identifying the key steps that school leaders should take when successfully implementing change, and in the sequencing of those steps too. In leading change, John Cotter offers us a steer on what these crucial steps might be, offering 8 of them, from creating a sense of urgency, a broad-based coalition, a clear and sensible change vision and strategy, through to anchoring new approaches in culture and producing more change. Interesting for such a seminal work in the change leadership literature, it draws from Cotter's personal research at MIT and Harvard, but contains neither footnotes or references. However, Applebaum, Habashi, Marlowe, and Shafiq, through a series of case studies, has suggested that there is real merit to Cotter's framework. A second broad area of research I'd like to look at centres around how participants read and interpret the changes that are taking place around them. This is the act of sense-giving and sense-making. Sense-making involves turning circumstances into a situation that is comprehended explicitly in words and that serves as a springboard into action, while sense-giving can be defined as a sense-making variant undertaken to create meanings for a target audience. Those definitions from Wegg, Sutcliffe, and Obsterfield. So does the way a leader presents change in organisational policies, structures and practices influence the way members collectively attempt to make sense of what is going on around them and how they should respond? And can leaders, by offering tentative attribution of meaning to experiences, influence the degree to which new practices are adopted and included in a redefined organisational reality? So in implementing change in cases of low cultural fit, if change such as moving teacher to student ratios from 1 to 25 to 3 to 75, or abandoning individual teacher planning in favour of team planning, is inconsistent with the prevailing norms and practices of an organisation, some people suggest that change is likely to be fragile and subject to regression. However, the work of Kanato, Ravasi and Phillips suggests that it's not as simple as this. Using case study methodology, they explored what happened when the incoming CEO of 3M attempted to implement the Six Sigma efficiency program, which was seen by many to be the opposite of the entrepreneurial initiative, freedom to experiment, and serendipitous discovery that were at the heart of the culture of 3M. Kanato et al. Observed that under normal circumstances, low cultural fit is likely to delay adoption of new practice. It might induce an organisation to implement the practice ceremonially, or it might lead to adapt the practice to improve the fit with its organisation. So what happens then in cases when teachers, through the rebuild of their school, are forced to implement strategies and practices that are a low cultural fit with the prevailing beliefs and values? If a school has a long tradition of autonomous teachers operating in their own single-cell classrooms, making unilateral choices about the right learning activities for a given group of students, and that same school is rebuilt using open, collaborative, flexible learning environments, what happens? Are the new low cultural fit practices adopted or abandoned, or are they adapted, as Kanato found in the case of 3M? Some questions about methodology. Any number of methodologies might prove helpful when exploring these questions. Semi-structured interviews and/or questionnaires with leaders and staff to try to determine which strategies best supported people through adaptive change, or a discourse analysis from within schools undertaking adaptive change, to look at the processes which, as sense-giving and sense-making, or the support offered to staff experiencing change, which ones are most effective. We might also use case studies to compare the approaches of different schools to Cotter's 1996 framework and to determine the degree to which fidelity to this model is an indicator of success. But one area in particular might prove to be more useful than others, given my role in the process. And this area is the field of autoethnography. Because of the role I play in supporting schools through the change processes, very few people are living the experience that I am at the moment, working alongside so many schools who are grappling with how to implement the adaptive change that comes with rethinking learning spaces and everything that touches those spaces. My subjective narrative may prove to be more widely useful than a set of case studies. So those are three potential areas of research in the Christchurch context, centred around leading change, particularly adaptive change, and how we adjust and support teacher practice when the space has changed, and also some thoughts on possible methodologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'd now invite Claire to. Do you want to sit at your chair, or would you like to stand up? It's really up to you.
Sit if that's okay.
Can I just hand over to you, Claire? We'll introduce Claire more formally in the afternoon session. But
sure.
Just hand over to you for now.
Thanks, Wes, and what a lovely two presentations to begin the day with, coming from New Zealand and I'm sure not accidentally grouped together, given the circumstances of New Zealand and the extent of change which is occurring. I think that between the two of you, there's been quite a territory that's been mapped out for us, and I think the areas that each of you have targeted on leadership in your case and collaboration in your case, Chris, are really rich areas. The thing that you're going to struggle with, I suppose, is how you can narrow it down. And I'm very optimistic. It's very clear that you are at the beginning, Mark, of this process, and that you're getting to understand the context, the research, the literature, the palette of methods available, which methodological framework you'll work within. But I think for two of you, autoethnography is going to be so important because you are living the change, each in your different ways. You worked in a new building, and that has meant quite dramatic changes of practices. You are sort of in a fabulous and a terrifying position where the decisions that you are making are going to have implications not for years but for decades on people. And you raised that really significant question: what is going to be the implications of spaces which aren't good fits with the people that are there? What's going to happen with those people? And this is the thing that we've been really fascinated by within the Australian context, haven't we? And we've seen places where the fits haven't been great. We've spoken to educators where they've worked really, really hard for months to change their practices. They have new spaces, and they're completely exhausted. And what our research has, I suppose, shown over the years is that you need this incredible alignment between leadership, between space, between professional development, between timetables even. This was kind of a kind of fascinating area that I suppose we've got to understand, is that you can have new spaces, but if you have old timetables, everything falls apart. Chris, I'm really interested in your collaboration happening on the fly. You know, previously, collaboration's been here, it's been happening a lot, but it happens elsewhere. In new spaces, what does collaboration look like where it's happening seamlessly all the time? Does it make things a lot easier? I think this topic of collaboration is something that'll be great to get to the bottom of. I can keep talking forever, but let's sort of have some responses, and we'll keep asking questions, and if others perhaps have questions, we might add to that. So you're finding, Chris, within your space that collaboration now is not between 2:30 and 3 on Wednesdays, it's much more seamless.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally,
Sorry.
traditionally, I suppose as teachers, we've lived a very isolated practice. You know, and you notice this even for, still for teaching students coming out of 4 years of teacher training, and they're still waiting to get into their kingdom, into their place, into their space. And collaborate, we work highly collaboratively in terms of identifying needs of students, digging into data, looking at teacher inquiry, professional learning on an ongoing basis. But as I said, that tends to happen somewhere else. We're looking now at sort of situational collaboration where it's around conversations that happen every day between teachers. It's about designing learning for a much wider range of students and having that dialogue between them. And it's raising issues about how do you address the elephants in the room when you've got three teachers and maybe something doesn't work, something's not working out, because it's actually the small things that create the biggest noise. It's things like people turning up late, making too much noise, leaving too much mess around. That seem to be causing some of those issues. So actually, building capacity in teachers to have those hard-to-have conversations with each other has been an absolutely massive part of developing that collaborative practice. And actually having an underpinning vision and structure that actually sort of explicitly says why we do what we do.
And Chris, the extra complexity with these open learning spaces is negotiating where students are, when, and how that can work seamlessly, because you know, Mary Featherstone talks about students being in the flow and allowing students to sort of work intensely and deeply on projects. If it's someone else's turn to use the space, how do you negotiate all of those complexities within the classroom? And that'll be great to, I think, tease out through your research. Mark and Chris, both of you talked about modern learning environments. It's part of your world. It's part of your language. It's not necessarily part of our world. And so what I'd suggest to the two of you is that you really interrogate the policy documents around modern learning environments. What are they? Where have they come from? You know, what are the assumptions behind modern learning environments? Something that I think we underestimate at our peril are the leadership decisions that come from outside the school, the government leadership decisions. What is important for teachers? Is it getting the best test scores? Is that the way they're going to get promoted? What's important for governments? Is it, you know, extra teachers, or is it new learning spaces? So I think interrogating those policy documents will be a really interesting part of your research.
Can I ask a question of Mark, Claire? Mark, within your scenario where you're implementing change from without someone, so you're working with change from outside of the schooling system to some degree, whereabouts does the power sit in what you're seeing happening in Christchurch?
Yeah, really, really interesting landscape, because New Zealand has self-determining or autonomous schools. So schools are governed by boards of trustees, which are locally elected members of the community. And there's a fair bit of autonomy given to those boards of trustees. There are some things, because the funding comes from the state, there are some things that are non-negotiable, such as the New Zealand curriculum, a national standards assessment regime, an NCEA assessment regime. But a lot of the choices around buildings and the way that those buildings are used are actually determined by the local community and the educators employed by that board of trustees. So there's huge autonomy in schools to be able to ensure that the built environment they get is the one that they need, that their community needs, and that they make the most of that opportunity. There's a mixed blessing in there, because it depends on the capacity of that community and that elected group of 7 members of that community to ensure that those spaces are well designed, there's a good cultural fit, and the professional learning processes that are taking place inside those schools are ensuring that the teaching is making the most of those spaces. And that's certainly in my experience, the communities that with whom I work, there are different stages of readiness to be able to take on all of those different facets of the process.
Are there questions from others here? Hi, Jo.
Hi, my name is Jo Dane. Chris, I picked up in particular your point about assuming that teachers know how to use these spaces and how important professional development is in this whole process. And that then, to me, leads on to how you can make it a sustainable enterprise, because you've got to have, the professional developers have to have an understanding of the pedagogy and the architecture and what the spaces enable, to be able to then pass that on to teachers. And then every time you've got a new staff member or graduate student teachers and so forth, it's how do you make that a sustainable entity?
Mark, did you hear that question?
Yes, I did, yes.
Great. And it was a question for Chris, I think.
Yeah, and I think Mark can jump in here as well. But yeah, it's a really, really good question. You know, there's a sense that we don't know what we don't know. In terms of learning environments, I mean, as Mark pointed out, this notion of for some school communities they are at a point of a greater point of readiness than others. Policy-wise, there's been a lot of dialogue around the professional learning model that's going to accompany this $1.137 billion of building. And it's you, isn't it, Mark? Yeah. And in terms sustainability. So it's, yeah, Mark, what do you...
Yeah, well, one of the things that I'm absolutely fascinated by is in New Zealand we have a personal and professional development process that we call teaching as inquiry. So teachers are actually researchers into the needs of their own classes. And it's written into the New Zealand curriculum that they become researchers for strategies that are most likely to make a difference given that student need. Now, almost all of the research that we rely on it's unquestionable. There's great meta-analyses that have been done, very good effect sizes for a range of different strategies. All of that stuff, almost all of it was done inside single-cell classrooms with teacher ratios of 1 to 25 or 1 to 30. And so we're drawing from a research base that is actually from a different context from a model learning environment. And so we need to be guided by that, but we have to recognise that actually that research came out of a particular context and it may not transfer directly to a collaborative teaching and learning environment or to an environment where students have more choice, more flexibility, more agency over what it is that they're learning. So I'm fascinated by the interplay of that research body and the requirements of a model learning environment.
If I could just ask one further question on that is, has there been any conversation with universities and their place in helping educate the student teachers in, getting at the coalface, at the student coalface, exposing them to modern learning environments at that point?
There are certainly some universities in New Zealand that are explicitly teaching modern learning practice and modern learning environments. I think so the conversation's definitely taking place. That's going to be one plank of the support that we provide to teachers. We always talk about, it's not the 3 years of training that you receive before joining the profession, it's the next 35 years that are the crucial ones. So that puts the real onus on the schools to become engines of continuous improvement and engines of continuous professional development, in addition to the initial training that our teachers receive. The other role that they play, obviously, is to find the research and to do the research that we will then take and use in those schools to improve teacher practice.
Ken?
I just want to make a comment, because it's too big a question, I think. But I really like your approach looking at I guess how students experience space and a sense of belonging. And for me, I'm teaching human environment relations to Master of Architecture students, and it's taken me in a whole new direction. I guess it's forward to the past. Actually, there was a movement, the Environmental Design Research Association, and it lapsed in the 90s, but it's now coming back quite strongly. And in a way, I'm keen to find evidence around how we I suppose how we relate to the environments that we're in. And when I was doing my thesis, I was in a school for about 1.5 years talking to kids, and they really have multiple identities. When they're in school, they feel like they're in prison. And I called my thesis the prisons of learning. So that's what they told me, constantly told me. So I'm really interested in that aspect of your research, understanding, and it's that socio-economic demographic as well that has an impact as well. But that's just a comment, really, not a question.
There are other comments or questions.
I'm Jonathan Wells from Woodley School, and I think it's actually the most interesting part of this will be the flexibility that you're able to put into the spaces, because I think the teaching and learning model is going to shift significantly in the next 10 years. We've almost got to get into the plumbing of the education, because it is that issue around timetabling and lengths of time and the way in which students are going to learn. It's going to change so radically over the next little while. And for us to be able to have spaces that transition us into that new model, which we don't really have a very clear picture of what it looks like yet, is going to be the key. Just the transformation we're getting as a result of technology entering the learning equation, and the fact that students are now kind of demanding to progress at their own pace and not be held back, and so there's not a lockstep, one-size-fits-all progression, at a year-level basis on. So we've got to have multiple learning strands happening concurrently and the fact that learning is becoming much more socially connected too. So the need to connect and build that collaborative model that you've been talking about, but it's very social too now, the learning space.
And I think the points that you've made are fantastic, because one of the things I noticed was both of you were reasonably silent on technology and the social changes that are occurring because of technology. So I think that they're great comments. I don't think that it's because you haven't thought about it, it's kind of so obvious that you almost don't need to say them. But if you do think about where we were 10 years ago, and we're very worried about students having phones, and that things have changed quite dramatically. Can I ask you both a question? It's actually to do with something that Chris mentioned, where, almost as a throwaway line, Chris, you mentioned something as being architecturally driven. I think we've seen a lot of spaces in Australia, certainly, and possibly internationally, that have been architecturally driven, and I think you can almost use it in a derogatory way. It suggests that perhaps the architects are thinking that it's all about them, and one of the really important things I think that architects need to get their head around is that they need to work very, very carefully with the educators, because in the end it is all about the education, isn't it? But developing that understanding of the different languages between educators and architects, and how an educator can work on what that vision is without trying to then move into the shoes of the architect. It's a dilemma, I think, that both of you are going to need to address. Possibly more so you, Mark, in that you're working at that coalface interface. And as educators, the risk is that you don't actually understand the possibilities of architecture, but I would also say that as architects there's the risk that you're not quite getting into the headspace of educators. One of the things that I've realised as I'm going through my research process is I am absolutely an architect, and it's just given me much greater respect for educators, and I think that mutual respect is fundamental to different expertise. So, what did you mean, architecturally driven?
Yeah, it wasn't meant as a derogatory. I noticed down at the Secretary Awards last week, that so many of those innovative learning environments that are coming up for those awards, when you actually look at the learning environments that are there, they are designed for collaboration. They're implicitly linked with the notion of more than one teacher operating in the environment. And I know that's not the case. I've been reading Ken Dovey and Ken's work, around some of those designs that actually sort of suggested them well. It was really the public spaces where half of those award-winning buildings were actually looking really innovative and actually quite camouflaging quite traditional learning environments. But I think in some ways and I've seen this at home, I think that the architects sort of they're excited to get into a design stuff. It's not just kind of square boxes, and they're kind of in some respects leading some of that drive with conversations with schools. And for principals and for schools, and I know this is a lot of some of the work that I've done, but it's actually exposing people to thinking that they haven't actually been exposed to, and taking them to places and illustrating actually this is what it might look like, and that's been really fundamental. So actually finding channels and opportunities to be able to do that, not only for principals but also for teachers, has been fundamental.
And Chris, that idea that you have looking at success stories as part of your research would be really important. We've probably got time for one more question. We've got another couple of minutes.
I think, sorry, I'm Vanessa from Queensland. I'll probably so fast. Chris, I think, the work that you were talking about, really examining the values, core values of teachers, I think that's absolutely fundamental. So I think, the interdisciplinary play between architecture and education, it's quite revolutionary. I think it's fantastic. But I think really the absolute, from an education background, the absolute key is really getting teachers to understand their values and beliefs. What is their role as an educator? Because they need to really open their mind to then be able to engage with architects and understand actually we do need to engage. So I think, it's fantastic the work.
two fabulous presentations to begin with. Congratulations, and great to have this technology working so well, Mark. I also just want to mention, I'm sure it will happen later in the day, and it's not necessarily my position to do it, but I just want to congratulate Wes and the team for getting today together, because we've got New Zealand, we've got Queensland, we've got ACT, people from South Australia, people from the country of Victoria. So it's amazing coming together of designers and educators working in this really interesting area. So well done, Wes.
And thank you so much for hosting this first session. So we'll actually hear from Claire in the second half of the day, where she's going to be taking over another quick session. But thank you so much, Claire. The conversations around this are critical because, as you can tell, the Snapshots notion is you just get a taste of what these people are doing, and it's through these conversations that that we start to tease out a little bit more about A, what we think these people might do to improve what they do. They are researchers after all, and they're learners, and we are teachers in the room, but also what we're learning from them, asking them questions for their expertise. Mark, thank you so much. I think you're thinking you might hang around a bit, and you're more than welcome to. And thank you for making yourself available, and the technology challenge that comes from trying to do something like this. Appreciate it.
Pleasure, thank you.
And thank you again, Chris, for hopping over the creek to be with us today. I would like to now start on our second little suite of speakers, and we're moving a bit. We're still within this notion of looking at what are the issues that are coming out of these new researchers, these graduate researchers, as David terms them. The next three have a much more architectural focus. So we will have a guest interlocutor, which will be Ken. Ken, you want to come sit up front, because you're a very important person for the next hour, 3/4 of an hour. And while Ken's doing that, I'll just quickly mention something about him. We all know Ken well, but I've just got to say I find this fascinating. He's internationally one of the leading education facility specialists in the world. Many, many years, 30 years, he says. He only looks like a spring chicken himself. But I love this part here. He says that he's an academic, a structural engineer, a strategic planner, a campus planner, a project manager, and a facility manager, and more recently, at that, an educational researcher. A lot of work with OECD, and he's been working on facility planning across 10, 15, 20, 25 countries internationally. And the last bit that I thought might be worth teasing out about Ken's little bio is he's now operating exclusively as a specialist in campus master planning and educational facility strategic consulting and architectural briefing. He's got away to that exclusively, as well as being a researcher and being a teacher and being a colleague and an active member within Learn and all the other things that Ken does. So it's fantastic having Ken along as our interlocutor for the next session. The three people we're going to have speaking now, we start off with Cheryl Jacob. So Cheryl, if you want to come up, and while you're stepping up, I'll have a quick word. The concept here was we'd be working with PhD students, master students, etc. on current and emerging research. There's a taste, though, of finished research coming in. Cheryl's finished her PhD. But I think the reason why we've taken her into the emerging issues stream is because, like all good research, the results of what Cheryl has done